Hi, my name's Sarah.
I'm Vanessa.
And we're here to answer your questions about big cat trade in South Africa.
Let's go for it.
Thank you very much. So, are there tigers in South Africa? So tigers are not native to South Africa, they're not an indigenous species to South Africa, but they are being bred in captivity. So they are being found on facilities or farms and being intensively bred for, we believe, commercial purposes.
And this contravenes CITES agreements, so international agreements between country and country, and especially when trade of these tigers is involved. Thank you. So, why is South Africa farming lions and tigers? Well, there are facilities that keep lions and tigers in captivity, and these animals are bred intensively, right? Basically, there's money to be made, and there's severe exploitation, but ultimately it's the animals that pay the price.
This process starts for lions and tigers when they're cubs. So obviously they pull in tourists for attractions, and things like cub petting. And then when these animals get a bit too big, so they become quite dangerous, and maybe their natural instincts start to kick in, that's when they can no longer be used in these kind of interactions. And that's when the trophy hunting comes into play. It's absolutely not for, conservation purposes. This is really an exploitation model to gain money for profit.
Thank you. All right, so I'm a South African. If it wasn't for farms, these cats would be extinct. It's better than zoos that keep them in small cages. All right, so we see it as extinction by another means. Essentially what we're seeing is wild populations declining rapidly, and then captive populations increasing and increasing. And the exploitation is completely there. So we see it as an extinction by another means, essentially, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It means that both species in the wild and species in captivity are going to be threatened with this threat of trade and exploitation.
What we want is to really harness your pride in being a South African. We need your help. We need your support to help us stamp this out.
Thank you. Is the trade or farming of big cats prohibited but going unpunished, or are there no regulations whatsoever? Yes, so there are regulations. So there are national regulations in South Africa for the farming and trade of big cats. And then above that, there are obviously also international regulations. Our most recent report, the Year of the Tiger, and the evidence included within that did actually show that while there are those national regulations, those aren't being implemented or monitored effectively, basically. Exploitation of big cats, and in particular tigers, has been allowed to flourish in South Africa. In terms of those international regulations, so that's things like CITES legislations, those too are not being implemented effectively. And that's something that we're really calling on, for those, the current legislation to be implemented, but also an overarching legislation that includes all big cats.
So even when you have the regulations, it's got to be properly enforced, and like the wildlife trade is so lucrative. It's like high reward, low risk, especially you don't really get caught very often, and the stuff that gets caught is the tip of the iceberg.
Thanks very much. Okay, so are the big cats smuggled across countries? Yes, they are. Smuggled internationally, nationally. From South Africa, we see big cats smuggled all over. Much of the time it goes to places like Asia, Southeast Asia, and our concern is obviously that these animals are being used for the luxury items and for traditional medicine. They do go all over to places like the US as well.
We see forged papers all the time. Got little lion cubs being moved across borders in Europe. So that it really is an international problem.
The way that we look at trade of big cats is primarily through the CITES trade database, and that's obviously legal trade. So that's really just the tip of the iceberg, basically. And the data shows that there's huge amounts of big cats being traded internationally all over. So yeah, that's a real concern for us.
Thank you. So, can you have a tiger as a pet in South Africa? And the answer is yes. So we do discourage it, and we do campaign against it. It's not just South Africa, but most countries as well. There are laws where you can have a pet, which don't seem fit for purpose. It
is something that we've seen really increase in popularity in South Africa recently, and definitely last year there are a number of instances that I can remember where big cats, and in particular tigers in South Africa, are being kept in people's homes and their back gardens. Unfortunately, as it stands, you can have a tiger as a pet in South Africa. Thanks. So if there is a ban, what happens to the animals? That's a really good question. And there are, multiple scenarios, but for us, the most important one is that these facilities are transformed into true sanctuaries. So establishments where there's no breeding, there's no interaction with animals and the public, so no petting, no walking with opportunities. It's really a place where these animals have been rescued and can live out their lives in an exploitation-free environment.
Yeah, so it's basically the grandfathering clause where you retire the animals. They are no longer used for breeding, no more interactions, and they're living in species-appropriate care, living their best lives. And I think Lions Rock is a good example of a bad facility that transitioned into a good facility